Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call in progress be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I spoke last night in anticipation of this all-night session that was going to take place, and I wasn't surprised at the general topics that were covered. There are probably 5 altogether, but they were stated over and over and over again. And I would like just to clarify a couple of things that probably are worthwhile this morning. One is my good friend from California, and this is a quote, and we took it down, said when 97 to 98% of the scientists say something is real, they don't have anything pressing them to say that other than the truth. They don't have any other agenda. They don't work for oil companies. And I will tell you, as chairman of the Environment Committee, every time the Republicans chose a so-called expert on climate, we have tracked them down to special interest funding, those 3% they know where the bread is buttered. That's kind of an interesting and a timely statement to make, because what they're not telling you, and I'm talking about the senator from California and the other Democrats, is that the hedge fund billionaire and climate activist Tom Styir plans to spend $100 million through his nexgen PAC. The nexgen PAC is his political action committee, and he's made the statement that he is going to be spending $100 million in the midterm elections of 2014, and it's going to be looking very carefully to make sure that all of the Democrats go along with his activist agenda. So that was actually a statement that was made, and it's been written up. That was the article that we had all documented. In fact, I'm going to submit for the record at this point all of the newspapers' articles, the Washington Post, the Washington Times, and others that talked about this climate activist, Tom Styir, who is going to be spending $100 million in the next election.
Without objection.
So what I'd like to do also just kind of cover the points that were made. As I say, they were made over and over again, different people saying them, the same talking points. I'm sure that Tom Steyer's people that had the talking points well prepared, and MoveOn.org and George Soros and Michael Moore and the Hollywood elites and that crowd all had their talking points to sound real good. And I'd noticed that so many of them were reading these points and were not really familiar with the issues. But last night, many of my colleagues pointed to weather as the reason for man-made climate change, yet they failed to quote meteorologists in their speeches. Let me read to you just what the meteorologists are saying about climate change. A recent study by George Mason University reported, and that was of over 400 TV meteorologists, they reported that 63% of the weathercasters believe that any global warming that occurs is a result of natural variation and not human activities. Now that's a significant 2-to-1 majority. Another study by the American Meteorological Society last year found that their members, nearly half, did not believe in man-made global warming. Furthermore, the survey found that scientists who professed liberal political views were more likely to proclaim man-made climate change than the rest of their colleagues. And I think we can name names here. Certainly one of the more prominent names was Heidi Cullen. She was with the Weather Channel. She spent most of her time with a background of very liberal thinking and a liberal agenda, talking about this until she's no longer there anymore and is with, right now, one of the groups, the very liberal groups. This is a good one here. Lifelong liberal Democrat. His name is Dr. Martin Hertzberg. He's a retired Navy meteorologist with a PhD in physical chemistry, also declared his dissent of warming fears in 2008. And this is a quote from this Dr. Martin Hertzberg. As a scientist and lifelong liberal Democrat, I find the constant regurgitation of the anecdotal fear-mongering claptrap about human-caused global warming to be a disservice to science. Hertzberg wrote and continued, he's still quoting, he said, the global warming alarmists don't even bother with data. All they have are half-baked computer models that are totally out of touch with reality and have already been proven to be false. CNN, not exactly a bastion of conservatism, had yet another of its meteorologists dissent from global warming fears. His name was Chad Myers, meteorologist for 22 years and certified by the American Meteorological Society, spoke out against anthropogenic climate change on CNN in December of 2008. He said, quote, you know, to think that we could affect weather all that much is pretty arrogant. And last night, but since they're talking about the weather, here are a few facts that aren't mentioned on droughts and hurricanes. Several of the people came to the floor during the evening and talked about the increase in droughts, the increase in hurricanes, and all of that. According to NOAA, the hurricanes have been in decline in the United States since the beginning of records in the 19th century. The worst decade for major Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes was in the 1940s. Severe droughts in 1934 covered 80% of the country. Well, the current one, the drought that we just went through a year and a half ago, was 25% of the country. Then they talked about last night. The ice caps are melting and all of that. My colleague, Senator Feinstein from California, pointed to melting ice caps as proof of climate change. Yet reports on what's not melting show a different story. This past December, a research expedition of climate scientists got stuck in deep ice in the Antarctic. We all remember that. I remember talking about that and showing pictures here on the floor when that took place. That was a bunch of people that were going up there to try to solidify their case on global warming, and they were stuck in the ice for weeks on end. And it took a couple of weeks and a couple more icebreakers getting stuck before the research vessel was finally freed. A paper published in October Journal of Climate examines the trend of sea ice extent along the East Antarctic coast from 2000 to 2008 and finds a significant increase averaging 1.43. That's 1.5% a year of increased ice in the Antarctic. Greenland, the IPCC. Now keep in mind, I talked yesterday about the IPCC. That's the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's the one that in a minute will show how it is discredited. But then Greenland, they said, and they admitted that in 2001, to melt Greenland, the ice sheet would require temperatures to rise by 5.5 degrees Celsius and remain for 1,000 years. The ice sheet is actually growing by 2% a year. Now that's what's going on right now, this very ice sheet. Everyone's concerned about Greenland, you know, and yet it's actually growing, not decreasing. In January 2010, Time magazine, the Himalayan melting, how a climate panel got it wrong. Glaciergate is a black eye for the IPCC and the climate science community as a whole. In December of 2008, Al Gore said, now this is good, Al Gore said the entire, see that's a little over 5 years ago, Al Gore said the entire north polarized cap would disappear in 5 years. Well, it's now 5 years and 1 month past the deadline of December of 2013, and Arctic ice is actually doing pretty well. Just last month, BBC reported that the Arctic ice cap coverage is close to 50% more than in the corresponding period in 2012. So contrary to what Al Gore predicted, that it'd be gone by now, that it did not disappear. I had a good quote there about Richard Lindzen talking about how Al Gore, he said, this is Richard Lindzen is one of the foremost authorities, scientific authorities on climate anywhere in the world. He's MIT and he's been quoted extensively. He said, talking about Gore, to treat all changes as something to fear is bad enough. To do it in order to exploit that fear is much worse. I mentioned last night that the New York Times designated that Al Gore is perhaps the first environmental billionaire in the United States. Well, he said the entire north polarized cap would disappear in 5 years. It's actually increased, but substantially. Last night, they talked about the IPCC is the gold standard of climate science. Senator Whitehouse defended the credibility of the IPCC despite ClimateGate, saying, quote, this is last night, so after all that, after 6 published reviews whose results confirmed that there was nothing wrong with the science as a result of these emails, we're talking about ClimateGate now, for people to continue to come to the floor and to suggest that the email change revealed some flaw in the data or some flaw in the science, it's just flat untrue. Simple as that, it's just not true. But we know this is not the case. The emails are very clear that the scientists were manipulating the data to generate a result that they wanted. And this is what some of the emails disclosed. One of the scientists said in the emails disclosed that the IPCC was systematically distorting facts, cooking the science of global warming to either cover up data that didn't tell the story that they wanted everyone to hear, and exaggerated the impacts of the changing climate to help drive people out of fear into action. Here are 2 examples of quite a few. We have about 12 examples. I've read them all in the past on the floor of the Senate. But here are a couple of examples how the IPCC was cooking the science. The IPCC claimed that the Himalayan glaciers would melt by 2035. Of course, it's not true. Yet it was put into the IPCC's 4th assessment report. The assessment report is a report that the IPCC has that the media picks up and the public consumes. According to the Sunday Times, that's in the UK, this claim was based off of a brochure that was used by the World Wildlife Fund to promote global warming activism. And they put it on a brochure after finding a paper from a little-known scientist in India. That scientist was wrong. According to the Times, the Himalayan glaciers are so thick and at such a high altitude that most glaciologists believe that it would take several hundred years to melt them at the present rate. Now, more alarming, from the East Anglia University Climate Research Unit, that's the CRU, disturbing evidence was revealed that the climatologists had been intentionally cooking the books. One leaked email from 1999. Now keep in mind, these are the guys that were giving the science to the IPCC. Quote, I've just completed Mike's nature trick of adding the real temps to each series for the last 20 years. In other words, from 1981 onwards and from 1961 for Keith's to hide the decline. In other words, they were falsifying the increase in the temperatures. And what he's saying is that he changed the numbers to show that warming is happening when it really hasn't happened. And another email that was revealed in 2009. The fact is, quote, the fact is we can't account for the lack of warming at the moment, and it is a travesty that we can't. Our observing systems is just inadequate. Despite this, the IPCC has continued to say that global warming is continuing to happening. The media outcry from these email leaks was really surprising because you didn't hear as much about it here in the United States as you did in the UK and other places. It seemed to be the mainstream press organizations who have been staunch partners with the global warming activists, alarmists, began to question their confidence in the whole premise. Here are some quotes. Now keep in mind, these are from legitimate organizations, publications, major publications that are credible. Christopher Booker, the UK Telegraph. The UK Telegraph is one of the largest papers in the United Kingdom. They said, what has happened with ClimateGate, and they're talking about falsifying the information so to make the people, the public believe that this is actually happening. The UK Telegraph said, it's the worst scientific scandal of our generation. Now that's pretty serious stuff there. I say to my friend in the chair, you know, the worst scientific scandal of our generation. Clive Cook, that's the Financial Times. The closed-mindedness of these supposed men of science is surprising even to me. The stink of intellectual corruption is overpowering. That was from the Financial Times. We're all familiar with that publication here. A prominent IPCC physicist said that ClimateGate was a fraud on a scale I've never seen. A UN scientist, Dr. Philip Lloyd, said, The result is not scientific. Newsweek said once celebrated climate researchers feel like used car salesmen. Some of the IPCC's most quoted data and recommendations were taken straight out of unchecked activist brochures. That's Newsweek magazine. George Moinboy, he's a columnist for The Guardian. He said, quote, "It is no use pretending." Now, he was on the other side of this issue, and he was upset because people were finding out the truth. He said, quote, "It is no use pretending that this isn't a major blow. The emails extracted by a hacker from the climate unit at the University of East Anglia could scarcely be more damaging. I am dismayed and I deeply am shaken by them. I was too trusting of some of those who provided evidence I championed. I would have been a better journalist if I had investigated it more closely." That's one of the strongest supporters of global warming. So last night we heard more and more things, and how we get the rest of the story, and that would be the thing that is most important. And I say this is the most important thing because many years ago, this would have been back about 2002, when almost everyone believed that the world's coming to an end, it's global warming, and it's all causing it. They all talked about how this must be true. Frankly, I thought it was true at that time, until we did some checking to find out what would it cost to regulate greenhouse gases. I mean, even if it were legitimate, a problem that is destroying this country, what would it cost? Well, the first reports that we got were from, I think, Charles Rivers and from the Wharton School. Some of their economists came up with it. The range is always between $300 and $400 billion a year. And this is based off of a regulatory threshold of 25,000 tons. This is pretty tough here. I have a good friend, Senator Ed Markey, that was in the House with me for quite some time. We disagree on this issue. But the last bill that came up, the last legislation to force us to have a type of cap and trade, was based on capping these people who emit 25,000 tons or more. Now, that is based off of a regulatory threshold of 25,000 tons. Only the largest facilities like oil refineries and power plants would have been affected. But doing it by regulation, what they cannot do by legislation, they have to do it under the Clean Air Act. Now, this is kind of in the weeds, but it's very important. The bill that I thought was, very too costly for the American people would regulate those who emitted 25,000 tons or more. But the Clean Air Act would regulate those 250 tons or more. That's every church, that's every school, that's every small shop would be covered, apartment buildings in America. And so you stop and think about it. We've never been able to calculate. No one disagrees with the fact that if we did it through regulation, it would cost between $300 and $400 billion a year. Now, for those people who are listening right now, $300 or $400 billion a year may not mean too much, but I always, every year, I calculate in my state of Oklahoma, how many people, families, do we have that file a federal tax return? Then I do the math. That would have meant $3,000 to each family in my state of Oklahoma. So it is a big deal. That's what it would cost them. And while they're extremely costly, the agency is busy doing other things that also include other types of regulations. The ozone, for example, their regulation, and it hasn't gone through yet, all 77 of my counties in Oklahoma would be out of attainment. That'd be 7 million jobs lost, or 7,000 in my state anyway, about 7,000 jobs. Utility MAC. This is something that's already been implemented. That's what put coal out of business. $100 billion in cost, 1.65 million jobs. Boiler MAC. Boiler MAC is already implemented also. Now, every manufacturing company has a boiler, and so they would regulate those boilers. The cost of that, $63 billion, costing 800,000 jobs that were lost. Now, that's already implemented. The BLM fracking regulations would be about $100,000 a well. Here's the thing on fracking. I can remember when hydraulic fracturing was something not many people knew much about. I did, because the first hydraulic fracturing took place in my state of Oklahoma. It was 1948, And it was, and I remember when the last director of the Environmental Protection Agency, Lisa Jackson, she made the statement, and when I asked her the question live on TV, I said, you know, is it causing groundwater contamination? She's the one who said there's never been a documented case of groundwater contamination by using hydraulic fracturing. Well, the President Obama, and his effort and his war on fossil fuels is trying to stop them. You've heard him say several times, well, we have good, cheap, abundant, plentiful natural gas to take care of our needs, our energies in America. Well, that part is true. But then the next thing he said was, we've got to stop hydraulic fracturing. Well, without hydraulic fracturing, you can't get 1 cubic foot of gas. And what we've tried to do is let the public know the cumulative impact of all these regulations. And a lot of people think of regulations as only affecting large corporations. You know, if you talk to Tom Buchanan in the state of Oklahoma, he was a recently elected president of the Oklahoma Farm Bureau, and you ask him what the most critical thing is for the farmers in the state of Oklahoma, he'll say the overregulation by the EPA. He said the overregulation by the EPA is much more significant to the ag community in Oklahoma and across the country than is anything in the Farm Bill. So their cumulative impact of all these regulations so far is about $630 billion annually and about 9 million jobs lost. So I would only say that last night they had a good time talking about these things. And the same story was told over and over again using a slightly different slant on it. But in terms of the cost, this is the thing. This is the reason that they tried ever since the Kyoto Convention. The first bill was introduced in 2002, and several of them since then. They were never able to pass a bill through the House and the Senate on regulating greenhouse gases, and because cap and trade is so costly. But here's the thing that people have to realize. I know right now, as I speak, there are a lot of people out there that really believe global warming is happening, really believe the world's coming to an end, really believe that we're going to have to do something about it. And so we start right here in the United States. And so knowing that these people are out there, and there are even people in my state of Oklahoma who have bought into this thing, when Lisa Jackson, who at that time, she's not there anymore, she was Obama's pick and was the director of the Environmental Protection Agency, I asked her the question on the record live on TV in one of our committee hearings, and I said, let's assume that we pass legislation and that we impose the cost of $300 to $400 billion on the American taxpayer. If that is the case, and if they did that, would that have the effect of reducing greenhouse gases worldwide? Her answer, no, it wouldn't, because the problem isn't in the United States. The problem is in China and India and Mexico and other places. Now, you could carry out that argument even further and say that those people who want to do away with emissions and have cap and trade in the United States, that could cause it to have actually more, not less, emissions of CO2, because we would be chasing our manufacturing base to countries that didn't have any requirements. So, you know, if you really believe it, then still it isn't true. And I would end with one more quote. Richard Lindzen, Dr. Richard Lindzen of MIT, the guy we talked about a minute ago, when he was asked the question, why is it so many of the bureaucrats, the very liberals who want government to be controlled from Washington, want our lives to be controlled from Washington, why is it that they are so concerned with carbon regulations? His answer was this, quote, Richard Lindzen, controlling carbon is a bureaucrat's dream. If you control carbon, you control life. And it's unfortunate, there are a lot of people even in this body, who believe that we should have much more power in the United States Senate. And I can assure you that the problems we're facing right now are problems because of too much power being concentrated here in Washington, D.C. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr.